Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, October 14, 2025. A federal government shutdown reaches day 14, and Republicans and Democrats seem to be digging in for the long haul. Air Traffic Controllers Union president talks about the first missed full paycheck for his members. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says despite no official economic data due to the government shutdown, the outlook for employment and inflation has not changed much since the September interest rate cut, suggesting there could be some more cuts this year. President Donald Trump welcomes the President of Argentina to the White House and is asked about the $20 billion the U.S. is using to support Argentina's economy. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro reacts to the guilty plea and sentence of the man who broke into the governor's residence earlier this year and set it on fire. Assassinated conservative activist Charlie Kirk receives posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. President Trump asked about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire and what happens if the Palestinian militant group does not give up their weapons. Responding, if they don't disarm, we will disarm them, and it will happen quickly and perhaps violently. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton presents the annual Hillary Rodham Clinton Awards for advancing women in peace and security. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defends new Pentagon media policies prohibiting reporters from publishing information not authorized for release, even if it's unclassified. Associated Press writes the shutdown entered its 14th day with the Senate returning from its holiday break. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson refusing to call lawmakers back to Washington, and President Donald Trump's budget director vowing to keep firing federal workers. Democrats have focused on trying to keep Affordable Care Act subsidies from expiring for millions of Americans who purchase insurance on Obamacare exchanges. Without this federal support, costs are expected to soar across the health care economy. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson said he won't negotiate unless Democrats first agree to reopen the government, losing their leverage for any deal. That was from Associated Press. The Senate tonight is voting again on the Republican version of the short-term government funding bill to reopen the government. This will be for an 8th time. It's not gotten the 60 votes needed in the previous 7. Senate not planning to vote on the Democratic version to reopen the government, which includes that money for the Affordable Care Act subsidies. That's also failed 7 previous times, not getting the 60 votes needed. The Senate leaders spoke on the Senate floor this afternoon. Here is John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the majority leader.
Quote, every day gets better for us, end quote. So said the Democrat leader in an interview published on Thursday, hours before Democrats once again voted to keep the government closed and to deny service members a paycheck. Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, missed part of their pay last Friday. But hey, at least life is getting better for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, a CNN article from Thursday said that Democrats are preparing to keep on with this shutdown for, and I quote, several more weeks. I guess Democrats are not going to be satisfied until military families and government workers are lining up at food banks or visiting payday lenders or simply charging necessary items like milk and bread on their credit cards to be repaid later if they can, along with the big interest charges that come with that. But hey, while military families and government workers may be deeply stressed, at least life is getting better every day for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I could at least understand a little bit more where Democrats are coming from if Republicans were asking them to swallow a lot of new Republican policies to reopen the government. But Republicans aren't asking Democrats for anything. We're not asking them to support any new Republican policies. We're not asking them to swallow any partisan policy riders. We have put forward, and the House has passed, a clean, nonpartisan CR. That's the bill Democrats are rejecting. And by the way, you certainly don't have to take my word for it that we put forward a clean bill. Here's what one mainstream news publication said last week, and I quote, "It's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes," end quote. It's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes, end quote. Yeah, that pretty much captures it right there in a nutshell, Mr. President.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the majority leader on the Senate floor. The Senate minority leader, Chuck Schumer of New York, also spoke about the government shutdown.
On day 14 of the Trump shutdown, I want to remind everybody why we're here in the first place. Democrats have made it very clear, day in, day out, we want to open the government and have a serious negotiation to fix the health care premium crisis that is set to wallop the American people. Nearly everyone agrees that looming ACA premium hikes is a devastating problem. The public knows it, we Democrats know it, the White House privately knows it, and even many Republicans here in Congress know it. They admit it. And yet, Republicans remain dug in and insist there's nothing to negotiate when it comes to health care, that they won't even sit down and talk with Democrats about it. That makes no sense. That's not the way we always get our CRs done. The Republican leader has now scheduled 7 votes on the Republican partisan CR, and it has failed to secure enough votes to pass this chamber each time. That means, like it or not, the Republican leader needs to work with Democrats in a bipartisan way to reopen the government, just as we did when we passed 13 CRs when I was majority leader. Last week, we saw what happens when Republicans choose to work with Democrats in a serious way. We passed the NDAA with the National Defense Bill, with a strong bipartisan vote. We need the same enthusiasm from Republicans that we saw in the NDA here in the health care issue. And of course, the biggest roadblock right now to reopening the government is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker has now kept Congress on vacation for 3 weeks. It's just incredible. Government workers must work without getting paid. House Republicans get paid without working. Johnson continues to insist there is nothing to negotiate. But I want to make one point very clear. Republican leaders can say all they want, there's nothing to negotiate. But if Republicans don't change course, then very soon 20 million Americans are going to face financial catastrophe when their health care premiums go through the roof. And many more Americans will face it than the 20 million, but 20 million are right on the front lines here because of the ACA. That is reality Republicans can't make disappear by just digging in.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the minority leader on the Senate floor. And the Senate is voting tonight on one of the 2 proposals they have been considering over the past 14 days of the government shutdown. That is the Republican version that passed the House that would temporarily fund the government, as the Republicans called it, clean. But the Democratic version that it's also been voted on recently and has not passed will not be voted on tonight. As Senator Schumer mentioned, the House is out of session for legislative business this week. Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, said he would bring members back to Washington after the government reopens. The Speaker held a news conference today in the U.S. Capitol.
You've been doing this every single day, coming up here trying to pressure Senate Democrats. They've been not budging. They've blocked this bill time and time again. So at what point, for the good of the country, do you need to change your strategy to try to negotiate a deal with them?
It's a great question. Manu asks, why don't I change my strategy? I don't have any strategy, Manu. I'm doing the right thing, the clearly obvious thing, the traditional thing. That's exactly what Chuck Schumer voted for in March of this year and gave impassioned speeches was the right and only thing. I don't have anything to negotiate. I'll say this again to everyone here. We did not load up the temporary funding bill with any Republican priorities or partisan priorities at all. I don't have anything that I can take off of that document to make it more palatable for them. So all I am able to do is come to this microphone every day, look right into the camera and plead with the American people, as Chairwoman McClain said, to call your Senate Democrats and ask them to do the right thing. We're not playing games. They're playing a game. We're not. The strategy is to do the right and obvious thing and keep the government moving for the people.
Why don't we move closer to their position?
Their position is this, Manu. Their position is they want to spend $1.5 trillion in your tax dollars to fund nonsense overseas. They want to give $200 billion to illegal aliens. We are not going to do that. We're not going to do it. The American people don't want us to do it. And they're using this for partisan political purposes to give themselves cover. They don't want the Marxist to kick. Chuck Schumer doesn't want to get a Marxist candidate challenge, AOC or someone else. Mamdani is probably going to be sadly, shockingly, the mayor of New York City. Marxism is on the rise in hey, this is not your father's Democratic Party, everybody, okay? They're turning into communists openly. And so Chuck Schumer does not fashion himself as a communist just yet. So he's got to show a fight to these people. That's what this is about. I'm not playing his game, Manu. I cannot go in and say, oh, gee, Chuck, what can I offer you? You know what? Maybe we'll just send $10 billion overseas to LGBTQ plus, initiatives in, the Horn of Africa or Malaysia or wherever you want to do that. No, we're not wasting taxpayers' dollars. Chad.
Speaker Mike Johnson at a news conference in the U.S. Capitol building today with other House Republican leaders. The speaker was also asked about the White House Office of Management and Budget, saying it has identified about $8 billion of unobligated research and development funds, which will be used to pay members of the military, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Space Force tomorrow. Military troops are paid on the 1st and 15th each month during government shutdown. They're not paid but must continue to report for duty. President Trump said over the weekend that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth should use all available funds to ensure troops get paid this week. Here's the question to the speaker.
What would you say to those who question the legality of the administration repurposing some of those funds to pay military members?
Look, my understanding of this is they have every right to move the funds around, duly appropriated dollars from Congress to the Department of Defense. There were some R&D accounts that had not been spent, and that's my understanding is that's the money that's being used to pay the troops right now. If the Democrats want to go to court and challenge troops being paid, bring it, okay? I'm grateful for a commander-in-chief who understands the priorities of the country, the necessity of national defense, and the urgency that we all feel and have voted for 8 times. Republicans have voted in Congress 8 times now between House and Senate to fund the troops and pay federal workers in all these essential jobs and agencies because we understand the necessity of that. Meanwhile, the Democrats voted 8 times to block their paychecks. I'm grateful we have a president who is willing to step up and do the right thing.
Speaker Mike Johnson at today's news conference. The Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posted that members of the Coast Guard, which falls under her department, will also be paid tomorrow through what she calls an innovative solution. President Trump today was asked by a reporter about paying the troops. He said they will be paid, and then he went on to mention a man who is a very wealthy person, and he said if there's any money necessary shortfall for the paying of the troops, that I will pay it, meaning he will pay. How about that? President Trump asked. President Trump also saying today the administration will put out a list on Friday of what he called socialist semi-communist programs that would be cut because of the government shutdown. The U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, held a news conference today about the government shutdown.
The president and the White House have confirmed now 4,000 firings across the federal government. As Kevin noted, that's something that Democrats previously said they were concerned about. If there was a government shutdown, the president would go through with this. Is there a way that Democrat strategy here has opened the door for the president to go about these firings?
Donald Trump and his administration have been engaging in mass firings since day one of his presidency. For the Republicans, cruelty is the point. And the fact that they are celebrating, meaning the extremists, the extreme MAGA Republicans, the fact that they're celebrating firing hardworking federal employees doesn't strengthen their position with the American people. It weakens it because the American people don't accept that kind of cruel and callous behavior and know that any responsible group of people would actually be standing up to support our hardworking federal employees and trying to actually find a bipartisan path forward to reopening the government, which is what Republicans refuse to do. In the face of a growing healthcare crisis, open enrollment on November 1st, premiums, copays, and deductibles about to skyrocket, and the fact that Republicans have already enacted the largest cut to Medicaid in American history as part of their one big ugly bill so they could reward their billionaire donors with permanent tax breaks. Well, at the same period of time, refuse to consider a multi-year extension of the Affordable Care Act or a permanent extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. Democrats are fighting for everyday Americans. Cancel the cuts, lower the costs, save health care.
The U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, holding a news conference today on Capitol Hill. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, at the White House, posting on X today, OMB is making every preparation to batten down the hatches and ride out the Democrats' intransigence. Pay the troops, pay law enforcement, continue the rifts, and wait. This is Washington Today. CNBC writing that air traffic controllers handed out leaflets at airports in New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. to urge the public to push Congress to end the shutdown. Controllers on Tuesday received their first partial paycheck and could go without pay altogether in 2 weeks if the shutdown continues. That was from CNBC. Nick Daniels is president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, or NACTA. He spoke to reporters at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport.
Today marks the first day that air traffic controllers have a completely different focus today. Their first loss of pay. Air traffic controllers are out moving over 45,000 flights today. 3 million passengers, tons of cargo that keeps America moving. And their focus is now on when they'll receive pay again. We ask these controllers to do heroic efforts. They're unsung heroes. And yet every single day that they show up to work now, they don't know when they'll get paid again until the shutdown's over. And so many can say, well, you'll get paid eventually. Well, that doesn't pay the bills today. They can't plan for it, and this introduces a new risk to aviation. Air traffic controllers are supposed to mitigate risk. Air traffic controllers ensure that risk is out of the system so that those who fly and those who we serve, that they are safe. And this brings a risk where their focus is now on, when I get off my shift today, do I have to go and drive Uber tonight? So that way I can put gas in the car or food on the table for my family. They have to go out, and now their focus is on, how do I defer a mortgage? We have so many young air traffic controllers just entering this system. The lowest paid air traffic controllers making approximately $45,000 a year, and the highest cost of living in the United States, trying to learn this job. But now when they're learning this job, they have to go pick up a second job before ensuring they're saving people's lives at work, day in and day out. And it is completely unacceptable that this risk is a part of the system. So our message is simple. Our message is clear. This job's hard enough 5 days a week, but they have to do it 6 days a week. 10,800 certified controllers where there should be 14,633. They work 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and they usually only have 4 days off in an entire month. Those are already heroic efforts. And now to say, well, just don't worry about the stress, the fatigue, the unnecessary distraction. And yes, keep your focus somehow on your primary job of saving lives while figuring out where you're going to pick up some income to take care of the most important thing to you, which is your families. So with that being said, we're calling on the elected officials to end this shutdown. Air traffic controllers are not responsible for starting a shutdown, and we're not responsible for ending shutdowns. Only our elected officials are, and our elected officials need to end this shutdown today.
Nick Daniels, president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, speaking to reporters at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport across the river from Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. Wall Street today, the Dow up 202, NASDAQ down 172, S&P down 10. New York Times writes that Jerome H. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, signaled further room for the central bank to lower borrowing costs this year to shore up the labor market despite the recent re-acceleration in inflation. Mr. Powell, speaking on Tuesday at an event hosted by the National Association for Business Economics, deviated little from his recent message that the Fed should be responsive to the slowdown in monthly jobs growth and other signs of softness across the labor market. While he conceded that economic activity was on a somewhat firmer trajectory than expected, Mr. Powell stressed that the downside risk to employment appeared to have risen. That suggests the central bank is likely to proceed with additional cuts at its two remaining meetings this year, one on October 28th and 29th, and another in December. That was from the New York Times. Here's Chair Powell at the National Association for Business Economics, the annual meeting in Philadelphia.
Although some important government data have been delayed due to the shutdown, we routinely review a wide variety of public and private sector data that have remained available. We also maintain a nationwide network of contacts through the reserve banks who provide valuable insights which will be summarized in tomorrow's Beige Book. Based on the data we do have, it's fair to say that the outlook for employment and inflation does not appear to have changed much since our September meeting 4 weeks ago. Data available prior to the shutdown, however, show that growth in economic activity may be on a somewhat firmer trajectory than expected. While the unemployment rate remained low through August, payroll gains have slowed sharply, likely in part due to a decline in labor force growth due to lower immigration and lower labor force participation. In this less dynamic and somewhat softer labor market, the downside risks to employment appear to have risen. While official employment data for September are delayed, available evidence suggests that both layoffs and hiring remain low, and that both households' perceptions of job availability and firms' perceptions of hiring difficulty continue their downward trajectories. Meanwhile, 12-month core PCE inflation was 2.9% in August, up slightly from earlier this year, as rising core goods inflation has outpaced continued disinflation in housing services. Available data and surveys continue to show that goods price increases primarily reflect tariffs rather than broader inflationary pressures. Consistent with these effects, near-term inflation expectations have generally increased this year, while most longer-term expectation measures remain aligned with our 2% goal. Rising downside risks to employment have shifted our assessment of the balance of risks. As a result, we judged it appropriate to take another step toward a more neutral policy stance at our September meeting. There is no risk-free path for policy as we navigate the tension between our employment and inflation goals. This challenge was evident in the dispersion of committee participants' projections at the September meeting. And I'll stress again that these projections should be understood as representing a range of potential outcomes whose probabilities evolve as new information informs our meeting-by-meeting approach to policymaking.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at the National Association for Business Economics, or NABE, annual meeting in Philadelphia. Axios reporting on another part of his speech. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell defended the central bank's management of its $6.6 trillion balance sheet, implicitly rejecting criticism from the Trump administration. As the president weighs Powell's replacement, the Fed chief argued that large-scale bond purchases helped keep the economy from the abyss during the pandemic and can be an important tool in the future. That was from Axios. Story from Reuters: the International Monetary Fund edged up its 2025 global growth forecast on Tuesday as tariff shocks and financial conditions have proven more benign than expected, but warned that a renewed U.S.-China trade war threatened by President Donald Trump could slow output significantly. The IMF now predicts global real GDP growth at 3.2% for 2025, up from a July forecast of 3%, and a more severe April forecast of 2.8% that came after Trump imposed broad global reciprocal tariffs and a tit-for-tat escalation with China ensued. It sees global growth at 3.1% in 2026, unchanged from the July forecast. That was from Reuters. The IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas spoke about the IMF World Economic Outlook today in Washington as part of the IMF World Bank annual meeting.
Global trade developments continue to shape the outlook, but other drivers are increasingly coming into the picture. In April, the U.S. shook global trade norms by announcing sweeping tariffs. Our April report offered a range of estimates for the resulting growth downgrade, from modest to significant. 6 months on, where are we? The good news is that the growth downgrade is at the modest end of the range, with growth projected at 3.2% this year and 3.1% next year, while inflation has increased modestly and is proving more persistent. Now, what explains this modest impact? First and foremost, the tariff shock itself is smaller than initially feared, with many trade deals and exemptions. Most countries also refrained from retaliation, keeping the trading system open, and the private sector proved agile, front-loading imports and rerouting supply chains. Second, financial conditions remain loose, in part because of a weaker dollar. In some countries, such as Germany and China, fiscal policy turned expansionary, and in the US, and AI and tech-driven investment is booming. Yet, despite all these offsets, the tariff shock is here, and it is further dimming already weak growth prospects. This is clear even in the US. Growth is revised down from last year, the labor market is weakening, and inflation has been revised up and is persistently above target, signs that the economy has been hit by a negative supply shock. Where do we go from here? The outlook remains fragile and very sensitive to news on the trade front, as I'm sure all of us have noted. Flaring up trade tensions with the potential for supply chain disruptions could quickly lower global output by as much as 0.3 percentage point, as we explore in our downside scenario.
The IMF chief economist, Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, in Washington, D.C. Washington Post writing about the IMF's World Economic Outlook. In the United States, where President Trump has promised a new golden age of manufacturing-centered growth, the economy will expand by 2% this year and 2.1% in 2026, the IMF said. From the New York Times, President Trump hosted Javier Milei, the leader of Argentina, at the White House on Tuesday, just days after the United States agreed to move ahead with a major bailout of the Latin American nation. The face-to-face meeting between the political allies comes after the Trump administration agreed to provide Argentina a $20 billion lifeline that would come in the form of a currency swap with the nation's central bank, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The details of the bailout remain unclear, but it could provide a political boost for Mr. Milei, who is hoping to stave off a financial crisis and a political disaster for his party. That was from the New York Times. President Trump was asked about this during the White House meeting.
How is this Argentina rescue package America first? And is this rescue package meant to help President Milei's party in the coming election?
No, it's really meant to help a good financial philosophy where Argentina can, after 20 years of disaster, because it was very successful at one point, and it can be again, like Venezuela. Venezuela was very, very successful, and now it's a dictatorship. When we can help our neighbors, we're making tremendous progress in South America. South America, Marco was telling me, he's like our great expert here. He really knows it. You were telling me that so many of the countries are coming our way. And we had, a few years ago, when I just came back, so I've been here now almost 9 months, but when I just came in, I was amazed to see how poorly we've done. We lost so many, and one of them was Argentina, would be lost if he wasn't there. And I think he will be there because the people recognize he's done an amazing job. He took over a real mess. So did I take over a mess. I took over a mess by, the Biden group. And Obama he started it, I'll tell you. Barack Hussein Obama started it. Could you give a couple of words on South America? You were telling me so well yesterday how well we're doing. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, we have now 8 or 9, 10 countries, Argentina being foremost among them, that have aligned with the United States on issue after issue in international community events all over the world. They're, in fact, these great allies like Argentina, but I can go into others, Costa Rica, I don't want to leave anybody out, El Salvador, but I think one of the more promising developments is later this month, there'll be an election in Bolivia. After 25, 30 years of anti-American hostile government, both of the candidates running in that election and the runoff election want strong and better relations with the United States. There's another transformative opportunity there. But so I think this is important. This is our hemisphere. It's where we live. And having strong neighbors such as this.
And great progress has been made, really.
And we'll make more. Absolutely.
Over the last 9 months. Really over the last 9 months. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, from Argentina, Buenos Aires, do you imagine soon a free trade agreement with Argentina? Could it be possible soon?
Yeah, it will be. Well, we're going to discuss some of it today. But no, we want to help Argentina. And we want to always help ourselves. But we want to help Argentina. And one of the ways we can do, they have great product. And we used to do a lot of trade, and then if you look at what the Democrats, well, they didn't know. They didn't know. Honestly, they didn't know what they were doing. But a lot of that trade disappeared, and they have great products. So we will be trading with Argentina, and it'll be helpful to them, and it's helpful. It's good for us also.
Mr. President, was China trying to draw a wedge between the U.S. and Argentina by buying soybeans from Argentina and not U.S. farmers?
I would say so.
And China on the port fees.
China
they've
likes to
increased
draw
port fees
wedges
on U.S. ships too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess that's natural. It's China, and it's natural, but it's not gonna mean anything in the end.
President Donald Trump in the White House cabinet room with the visiting president of Argentina, Javier Milei. President Trump calling him MAGA all the way and that he's my favorite president. Again, from the New York Times article, major hedge funds, including those led by friends of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, could benefit financially from the administration's lifeline for Argentina. Funds at various investment firms, including BlackRock, Fidelity, and PIMCO, are heavily invested in Argentina, as are investors who worked with Mr. Bessent when he was an investor for George Soros. That was from the New York Times. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday on C-SPAN's Ceasefire, Maryland Democratic Governor Wes Moore and Oklahoma Republican Governor Kevin Stitt sit down together with host Dasha Burns. Ceasefire, Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only on C-SPAN.
C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, brings you a recap of the day's most important events. Find out what happened on Capitol Hill, the White House, and with policymakers, all delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe now at cspan.org/connect.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. The man charged in the April arson attack at Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence was sentenced Tuesday to decades in prison after pleading guilty to several charges, begins an NBC News article. It goes on, Cody A. Balmer, 38, pleaded guilty to attempted murder, aggravated arson, 22 counts of arson, burglary, and other offenses, according to the Dauphin County District Attorney's Office. Under the plea deal, he was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in state prison, the District Attorney's Office said in a statement. Prosecutors accused Balmer of breaking into the governor's residence in Harrisburg and setting it on fire on April 13th, the second day of Passover. Shapiro, who is Jewish, was having a Passover Seder at the home the night before the attack, according to officials. Some of the reporting from NBC News. Governor Shapiro made a statement today at the governor's residence in Harrisburg, and by his side, the First Lady, Lori Shapiro.
Laura and I are mindful that serving in public office today brings with it risks. It's a sad state of the world that we are in. But I have to tell you that before this attack, those risks just felt very theoretical to me. Something that might happen elsewhere to someone else, but couldn't happen here. Sadly, this made it all real. And it brings with it a real sense of vulnerability that our family feels every single day. I want you to know we are working through this, and you've heard me talk about the emotional toll this attack took. I need you to know this is an ongoing thing that we are dealing with and we are working through. And I think we're confident it'll get better, but we also know it's going to always be with us. Sadly, as you know, our family is not the only ones to experience political violence that is used to try and silence people or intimidate people. I think it's important that in this time of rising political violence that none of us grow numb to it or accept this as the normal course of doing business for elected officials. So many leaders from here in Pennsylvania and across the country, actually across the globe, have reached out to offer comfort over the last number of months. And inevitably, those conversations turn to their own sense of vulnerability, their own worry about political violence. I've talked to people who are thinking about running for office, who have said they don't want to because they don't want to put their families at risk. These are good people who just want to serve, who want to do right by their communities, who are being impacted by this unacceptable level of political violence that we're seeing in our country. I think we need real accountability for acts of political violence. And today is real accountability for the violence that came here to Pennsylvania. Governor
Josh Shapiro, Democrat of Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, the capital, with the First Lady, Lori, standing beside him after the man charged in the attack on his family earlier this year pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. The governor also saying today, "I've carried with me this enormous sense of guilt that doing this job that I love so much has put our children's lives at risk." NBC News also reporting that new video footage of the break-in and arson have been released, including Cody Balmer, quote, striking at two doors, including a door that led to where the governor's family and guests slept, but not breaking through. President Donald Trump today awarded posthumously conservative activist Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Kirk is the founder of Turning Point USA. He was shot and killed last month while speaking at a college campus in Utah. Today would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday. U.S. House and Senate have passed a resolution to mark today as a national day of remembrance. The Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony was in the White House Rose Garden. And after President Trump spoke, Charlie's widow, Erica, who is now CEO of Turning Point USA, said a few words.
And today we're gathered not only to celebrate Charlie's birthday, but to honor a truth that he gave his entire life to defend, and that's freedom. The very existence of the Presidential Medal of Freedom reminds us that the national interest of the United States has always been freedom. Our founders etched it into the preamble of our Constitution, and those words are not relics on parchment. They are a living covenant. The blessings of liberty are not man's invention, they are God's endowment. Charlie lived for those blessings, not as abstract words, but as sacred promises. He used to love to journal about this topic all the time, and with such a heart postured of gratitude. And he believed that liberty was both a right and a responsibility. And he used to say, freedom is the ability to do what is right without fear. And that's how he lived. He was free from fear. He was free from compromise, free from anything that could enslave his soul.
Erica Kirk in the White House Rose Garden. Beside her, President Donald Trump presenting today the Presidential Medal of Freedom to the late conservative activist. Erica Kirk also talking about how the assassination of her husband has affected her children.
And before I close, I'll share with you that I asked our daughter what she would like to say to Daddy for his birthday. Excuse me. She said, "Happy birthday, Daddy. I want to give you a stuffed animal. I want you to eat a cupcake with ice cream, and I want you to go have a birthday surprise. I love you," is what she said. And while our son is precious, he can't yet speak, in classic Kirk family fashion, his actions spoke louder than his words, and his gift to you, Charlie, and myself for that matter, was deciding to become the man of the house and be fully potty trained at 16 months. But Charlie, baby, I know that you're celebrating in heaven today, but gosh, I miss you. We miss you, and we love you, and we promise we'll make you proud. And Charlie's life was proof that freedom is not a theory, it's a testimony. He showed us that liberty begins not in the halls of power, but in the man of a heart surrendered to God. And so today, as we honor Charlie with this incredible Presidential Medal of Freedom on his birthday, I stand here with tears and just a humbled heart and spirit, because his story reminds us all that to live free is the greatest gift, but to die free is the greatest victory. Happy birthday, my Charlie. Happy Freedom Day. God bless you.
Erica Kirk, who is now CEO of Turning Point USA, in the White House Rose Garden, President Donald Trump awarding the late Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. You can find the full ceremony at our video library at cspan.org. Story from CNN, the Supreme Court declined an appeal from Alex Jones on Tuesday, brushing aside the right-wing conspiracy theorist's effort to overturn a $1.4 billion libel judgment a lower court ordered against him over his false comments about the 2012 Sandy Hook school massacre. And from CBS News, Letitia James, New York's indicted attorney general, spoke at a campaign rally for mayoral frontrunner Zohran Mamdani in her first public appearance since the Justice Department charged her with bank fraud. James, a longtime foe of President Trump, received a standing ovation from thousands of supporters attending the Democratic nominees event Monday night at the United Palace Theater in Manhattan's Washington Heights neighborhood. James did not mention Mr. Trump by name, but remained defiant in her remarks. That was reporting from CBS News. Here's part of the speech.
You see, I know what it feels like to be attacked for just doing your job. But I also know what it feels like to overcome adversity. And so I stand on solid rock. And I will not bow. I will not break. I will not bend. I will not capitulate. I will not give in. I will not give up. You come for me, you gotta come to all of us. All of us. Every single one of us. We're all in this together. You see, I've learned to stand on the shoulders of my ancestors who came before me and weathered the storm. And despite being seared with scars, they survived. And if they can survive, so will we. So over the last few days, I've summoned their strength and their courage. And I will keep fighting for justice. I will keep fighting for New Yorkers. I will keep fighting the aggressive policies of Washington, D.C., and I will not stop. I won't give up. And I won't give in. So we have no time to linger and focus on pettiness and revenge. We've got to press on, press forward, continue the journey, claim the victory. Triumph over fear and courage. Courage, my friend, is resistance to fear. And so I fear no man.
New York Attorney General Letitia James, a Democrat, at a rally Monday night on behalf of New York mayoral candidate, Democratic nominee for mayor Zohran Mamdani in New York City. Associated Press writing about James's speech. Last week, James was charged with bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution stemming from a house she bought in Norfolk, Virginia for $137,000 in 2020. Federal prosecutors say the mortgage James obtained for the purchase required the house to be primarily for her personal use for 1 year. They say James broke that rule by renting the house out to a family of 3. James and her lawyers have not answered questions about the home purchase, but in a video statement last week, she dismissed the charges as baseless. She also decried the federal indictment as nothing more than a continuation of the president's desperate weaponization of our justice system. James is expected to make her initial appearance in a federal court in Virginia October 24th. That was from Associated Press. Maine's Governor Janet Mills, begins an NPR article, announced Tuesday that she'll enter the race to defeat Republican U.S. Senator Susan Collins, a top target in National Democrats' bid to regain the Senate. Mills was recruited by Democratic Senate leaders after her high-profile confrontation with President Trump in February over a transgender athlete, a dispute that triggered a wave of retaliatory moves by his administration against the state. The exchange is featured in her launch ad. That was from NPR. Here is part of the video she's released today.
You know, my father was a seventh-generation Mainer who stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. And when I was little, he told me, you can't let bullies have their way, or they'll never stop. So I heard my father's voice when the bullies in power said a woman couldn't be a prosecutor, or an attorney general, or a governor. So I fought back, and I won. And yes, it was my father's voice I heard that February morning when the President of the United States confronted me. We stood up to Trump and stopped him from cutting the school lunch program for Maine kids. But there are too many politicians in Washington, including Susan Collins.
Susan Collins, we want to thank.
Who've forgotten their principles and let bullies like Trump have their way. And it's hurting Maine people. I've never backed down from a bully, and I never will. Honestly, if this president and this Congress were doing things that were even remotely acceptable, I wouldn't be running for the U.S. Senate. But when Trump rips away health care from millions of Americans and drives up costs on everything from groceries to housing to trucks and cars, then turns around and gives corporate CEOs a massive tax cut, and Susan Collins helps him do it after she helped him overturn Roe v. Wade, I hear my father's voice saying, fight back, Janet.
Maine Governor Janet Mills announcing she is a candidate for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senator in 2026. Part of the video she released today. The incumbent Senator Susan Collins, a Republican, is running for a six-year term. NBC News writing about this. The contested primary comes at a tense moment for the party, with some Democrats calling for a new generation of leaders as they grapple with their defeat in the 2024 election. Mills, 77 years old, acknowledged age is a consideration. She said, honestly, I would not plan to serve for more than one term, but this time is vital, and this moment in our history is urgent and very troublesome, and I believe I'm the most qualified person for the seat, for the campaign, because I have run two statewide elections, and I have the energy and the wherewithal to do it. That was from NBC News. This is Washington Today. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton celebrated women who advocate for democratic values at Georgetown University's annual Hillary Rodham Clinton Awards for Advancing Women in Peace and Security ceremony. The awards given to a Filipina journalist, Maria Ressa, historian and journalist Anna Applebaum, Bangladeshi students who organized the July Revolution, pro-democracy movement, and current and former Venezuelan political prisoners. Hillary Clinton, in her opening remarks, spoke about the 30th anniversary of the 1995 United Nations Fourth World Congress on Women held in Beijing, China, which Hillary Clinton attended as a First Lady, and its platform for action that was adopted by 189 countries.
What we have learned in those 30 years is that the rights outlined in that platform for action are not enough without the power to claim and hold them. For example, over the past 30 years, women's workforce participation has flatlined. Violence against women still persists, especially in conflict areas, of which there are far too many. Power and leadership is still dominated by men. Peace and security is still, unfortunately, hammered out, usually among and by men, with women being sidelined, despite evidence, much of it coming from the Georgetown Institute on Women, Peace, and Security, that women being involved in peacemaking and peace securing makes peace last longer. And even when rights are on paper, if we don't invest in women's ability to claim those rights, if we don't stand against social norms that strip women of their rights in practice, we can't claim that we are moving toward equality. And as Milan referenced, it is no coincidence that where women are oppressed, democracy falters and authoritarianism rises. From suffrage to civil rights movements, women's participation is critical to democracy. And when autocrats attack democracy, they always seem to target women.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the annual Hillary Rodham Clinton Awards ceremony held by Georgetown University's Institute for Advancing Women in Peace and Security. She also spoke about the situation in the United States.
These women remind us of the great privilege and also the great obligation we all have to use our own voices. We cannot be silent in the face of corruption and injustice anywhere, including here at home. So as we lift up our allies who are fighting for democracy and freedom, let's also lift up those here who are trying to do the same against the militarization of our cities, against the stripping of rights, against corruption out in the open, against the kind of actions being taken that are right out of the authoritarian playbook.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the awards ceremony named for her today at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social today about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Just got back from the Middle East. What a point in time it was. All 20 hostages are back and feeling as good as can be expected. A big burden has been lifted, but the job is not done. The dead have not been returned as promised. Phase 2 begins right now. Signed, President DJT. The president was asked at a White House meeting today with the Argentinian president about what happens next in the Middle East.
How long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games, okay? Now, we did something monumental. We got the hostages back. That was the first thing we had to do. Above all else, get the hostages back. Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that because we're talking about a much lesser number. But that's a very tough subject. I want them back. That's what they said. I want them back. Also, they said they were going to disarm. And initially speaking, they needed, they did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you. That's okay. We had a couple of very bad gangs. It's no different than other countries. Like Venezuela sent their gangs into us, and we took care of those gangs. We have Washington, D.C. is one of the safest cities in the country. It was one of the worst cities in the country if you go back just a little while ago, right? Now it's safe. You can walk to work. Isn't it nice? But we have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes, you say
because
quickly.
Everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm, or we will disarm them. Got it?
President Donald Trump in the White House cabinet room. Wall Street Journal reporting today from Tel Aviv that Israel and Hamas on Tuesday accused each other of violating the ceasefire that was part of the deal that released all 20 living hostages from Gaza, with Israel reducing the humanitarian aid promised under the agreement to increase pressure on Hamas to return more bodies of deceased hostages. From Politico, Fox News, which previously employed Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, joined most major news organizations on Tuesday in refusing to agree to new rules around reporting at the Pentagon. The company signed a joint statement with ABC News, CBS News, CNN, and NBC News, saying the new requirements would restrict journalists' ability to keep the nation and the world informed of important national security issues. The move is a blow to Hegseth, a former host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Hegseth announced the new rules last month, threatening journalists access to the Pentagon if they did not sign on to rules that would punish them for either soliciting or publishing information that the Pentagon did not want released. That was from Politico. President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth got asked about this today.
Will you consider removing new restrictions on the press that report at the Pentagon? And have you spoken to Secretary Hegseth about this?
I have, yeah. Well, he's finding, I think I can speak for him. I'll let him speak for himself, but I think he finds the press to be very disruptive in terms of world peace and maybe security for our nation. Press is very dishonest. Not you, but the press is very dishonest. Do you have something to say?
Well, I very much appreciate the question because it was interesting to watch. We had a chance to go along on the historic trip of Middle East peace, which our generation of veterans never dreamed would be possible. So you would think that the Pentagon press corps of all press corps would be front and center across the board on wanting to give credit to the president for forging this kind of peace, and instead what they want to talk about is a policy about them, which simply says maybe the policy should look like the White House or other military installations where you have to wear a badge that identifies that you're press, or you can't just roam anywhere you want. It used to be, Mr. President, the press could go anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the Pentagon, the most classified area in the world. Or also that if they sign on to the credentialing, they're not going to try to get soldiers to break the law by giving them classified information. So it's common sense stuff, Mr. President. We're trying to make sure national security is respected, and we're proud of the policy.
You know, we have an option here, as you know, the press years ago moved into the White House. It used to be across the street. We could move them. You're lucky I'm president, because we could move them very easily across the street. They used to be there. They would have more room. We have a beautiful, nice space. You can sit all by yourselves and have fun. Instead, you walk around the White House talking to anybody that can breathe. And, you know, but I find that when it comes to war, and now our great Department of War, we have some great people over there, I think it bothers me to have soldiers and even, you know, high-ranking generals walking around with you guys on their sleeve, asking them, because they can make a mistake, and a mistake can be tragic. They can do it innocently, too. They can, you know, and they're not press people. They don't really deal with the press, so they're not really necessarily good at it, although I think it's mostly instinctual one way or the other. You're either good at things or you're not. But I could see you being bothered by that. And so you have them in an area and you treat them fairly, but they're not allowed to go into
much like the
somebody's office and sit with them for 10 hours.
Yes.
President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at today's White House meeting with the visiting President of Argentina. Again, from the Politico article, an initial memo to reporters read that information must be approved for public release by an appropriate authorizing official before it is released, even if it is unclassified. Reporters that did not sign onto the agreement would not be issued press passes. The deadline to agree was today, and so far it's being reported that one network has agreed, One America News Network, and some of the prominent outlets saying no: The Atlantic, the Associated Press, The Guardian, Newsmax, NPR, Reuters, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.